Welcome to the world as I like it to be. I am your host, Eric Darnley Small, here for the second time doing a live video series based on the podcast I created about 3 years ago or so. And this is sort of a breaking news type of series right now. It's still in development. This is sort of a one-man show, as I've mentioned the last time I did this. So still trying to work out all the kinks and get things going, but hopefully this thing will work out and people will enjoy it. There should be on stream.vtip.net, there should be the ability to chat, so you can send messages live. Because I'm doing this on my own, I'm actually not going to be able to check messages that often, but at certain times I'll be able to take a look, so you can message me there. This should also be on YouTube. Go to twitter.com / the world as I like, and look there for the link for the YouTube. Although, people should be seeing the tweets, particularly since I've been advertising it. So let's get into some very interesting news, by the way, happening as we speak, and I want to sort of jump right into it so that people are aware of what's going on. And then I have some very particular stories I want to follow. But let's start with, there is some breaking news to some extent with the Senate Democrats starting to work on a $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation. People may remember that the budget reconciliation is going to go hand in hand, or supposedly is going hand in hand, with the infrastructure deal. Already there is some crowing that people like Joe Manchin and some of the so-called problem solver caucus members are not wanting to sign on to the $3.5 trillion deal until after the $1 trillion, traditional infrastructure is done. But Majority Leader Schumer on Monday released the full text of the Democrats' $3.5 trillion budget resolution, which the Senate expected to pass without any Republican votes as early as this week. This is a big deal. Not to belabor the point, but this is something that is going to deal with issues that have been on the Democratic agenda for many, many years, perhaps many even generations. And it's going to put a lot of Democrats, who are your so-called moderate Democrats, blue dog Democrats, conservative Dems, on the hook. And they do not want to sign this budget reconciliation bill because of the expense. Passing the resolution is the first significant step to enacting Democrats' plan to overhaul the country's climate and child care and health care laws through the budget reconciliation process. By the way, there were things that were taken out of the infrastructure in order to satisfy the Joe Manchins, the Kristen Sinemas, as well as Republicans, to get them to sign on board this thing, that were taken out of the infrastructure bill, that everybody said, your probably your Chuck Schumers, your Nancy Pelosi's, as well as your Bernie Sanders were saying, we're going to get it in the reconciliation bill. What is reconciliation? It's basically a Senate maneuver or tool that allows you to pass certain budget-related bills using just the majority. It is a slim majority in the Senate for Democrats. There are only 50 Democrats. There are 50 Republicans, because the president is a Democrat. His vice president is technically the president of the Senate, and that person can come in and cast the 51st vote. That vote would then break a tie, and you can pass these bills on just the majority basis. Now, there are a lot of things it can impact the deficit. There are a lot of other things that you have to take into account with regard to these bills. But let's be clear already, because you have these moderates saying we need to just pass the infrastructure bill, then worry about the filibuster bill. And remember, you had people going out saying in the very beginning, and Joe Biden got into trouble for saying this, saying basically that the infrastructure and the filibuster are a 1-2 punch. They are going to go together. If one doesn't pass, the other doesn't pass. Now that this is looking like a possibility, looking like it's going to happen, folks are talking about, let's just get the one done and then we can come back to the other one later. By the way, what's also going on here is the calendar. The Senate is going on break for a month. So Schumer has to get this thing out as quickly as possible because his members want to go on break. And already Kristen Sinema has said, I'm not staying around. I'm not going to not go on break for a month just to do this Senate reconciliation bill. So she's become quite the I don't know, what would you call her? I'm trying to avoid any bad words. But she's become very interesting in this time, her positions. In addition, going back to this bill, let me just say that what's surprising here is that the Republicans, you're getting an enormous number. This is going to pass like 70 to whatever the remaining 70 to 30 or whatever it is. Because Mitch McConnell appears to be on board with this thing, although they're going to place their battle on the debt ceiling, according to Axios. This is Axios today, as of probably about an hour or so. McConnell has threatened to refuse to vote for raising the debt ceiling. What is the debt ceiling? The debt ceiling used to be a performative vote, which basically says we are going to pay for all of the debt that we have already incurred, because, of course, if you're incurring more debt, that means that you're spending more than you had originally budgeted for. So by lifting the debt ceiling, you're saying we're going to increase the amount that Congress can spend on debt, and by doing so, we are going to be able to pay our bills. This used to be for a long time just a perfunctory, just everyone just did it. Nobody cared. But since the time of the Tea Party and Barack Obama, all of a sudden, using the full faith and credit of the American people, it became a way of exacting certain things out of the other side. And this is extremely dangerous for the economy. But Mitch McConnell and his Republican allies have decided it's worth doing. So it looks like that is going to be happening again. They're going to start messing around with the debt ceiling, which is very unfortunate. Of course, always, the Treasury Secretary has to get in and has to begin to say, oh, we don't, we've got to pay our bills, guys, yada, 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 urge to raise the debt ceiling with Republican support. The agreement reached by Schumer and the White House states that the $3.5 trillion will be fully offset by a combination of new tax revenue, healthcare savings, and long-term economic growth. It's important to note that Paul Krugman, who I read almost on a daily basis, came out with an article talking about in praise of smoke and mirrors, basically calling this whole idea of being able to pay for this using these tricks, these legislative tricks, smoke and mirrors, and a bill receiving support from a large enough minority of Republican senators to overcome the filibuster. This bill falls short of what the Americans really need. It will be up to Democrats to fill the gaps, yada, yada, yada. How did the Senate get here? He talks about that. On the surface, Republican demand should have made an agreement impossible. GOP senators were adamantly opposed to tax increases. Yada, yada, yada. And he goes on to talk about the insistence that new spending be paid for, unlike, say, their tax cut rammed through in 2017, which they blithely and falsely claimed would pay for itself. How did they work to? Basically, they faked their way through. Much of the support funding would come from account gimmicks. In particular, a lot of the funding would involve repurposing money from COVID-19 relief programs that ended up costing less than expected, while ignoring programs that cost more than expected. So even Paul Krugman recognizes that this is a gimmick, and so be it for gimmickry. And, listen, if they can do gimmicks, so can the rest of us. Okay, get into some news here on Delta. Delta is probably, and I think should be for the foreseeable future, the most important thing that we discuss and talk about. And the reason why it's so important, there's two things going on. Number one is in Florida, the case rates are going through the roof. Embarrassingly so. And the response from the governor has been quite shocking. And I'm going to play some video right now. We'll talk about it. Actually, there's going to be two clips. It's going to be one about what's going on in Florida. This was from last week, I think Friday, NBC. And then another piece, NBC, from over the weekend about a pastor and his congregation dealing with COVID. We'll talk about it on the side.
New COVID milestones tonight. Cases in the U.S. more than doubling in the last 2 weeks. Now, more than 100,000 a day. As lines for testing starting to mirror last summer's dramatic spike. The country's COVID epicenter, Florida, shattering its daily record. More than 23,000 new cases on Friday alone. And another jump in hospitalizations to more than 13,000 in the state. Cars snaking down roads, families waiting in the heat in Tallahassee.
Have you been vaccinated?
I have not, no.
But just 2 blocks away at the local vaccination site, a slow trickle. Nationwide, still more than 100 million Americans yet to get a shot. Dr. Anthony Fauci now saying he expects the FDA to give full approval to the Pfizer vaccine in just a few weeks, telling USA Today that he anticipates a flood of vaccine mandates when that happens.
We know that we can curb this in 3 to 4 weeks if everybody does what needs to be done in order to curb the virus.
But for now, hospitals in Texas are overwhelmed. All 5 Houston pediatric wards are full. 11-month-old Ava Ramirez, COVID positive, had to be airlifted to a hospital 150 miles away.
She arrived at a hospital in Houston where, because of her condition, they needed to put her on a breathing machine.
And concerns only mounting. 700,000 bikers expected in South Dakota this weekend for the annual Sturgis motorcycle rally, despite widespread transmission at the same event last year. And according to a document obtained by NBC News, more than 18% of migrant families on the border are testing positive before being deported. The U.S. now averaging nearly 500 deaths a day. Officials desperately hoping these rising numbers will lead more people to get vaccinated.
I'd rather know than not know.
Have you been vaccinated?
I've not been vaccinated. I have actually been against the vaccine prior to this, but I'm actually considering it now, because I do have small kids.
Vaughn, who did you see at those testing sites today?
We saw young people, college students, parents with school-aged children, and the data reflects that. In the last week in Florida, more than half the new cases are people under the age of 40. Jose?
A swarm of COVID-19 cases reported inside the Jacksonville Impact Church. Senior pastor George Davis says his phone hasn't stopped ringing.
In the last 10 days, we have had 6 members of our church who have passed away from COVID. 4 of them were under the age of 35. All of them were healthy, and the only thing they had in common is each of them were not vaccinated.
He says 15 to 20 members are in the hospital, another 10 or so at home with the virus, and 3 to 5 vaccinated members also tested positive.
Well, it's pain. These are actual people that I know, that I've pastored, that one 24-year-old kid, I've known him since he was a toddler.
Davis says it was late in July when they learned a member tested positive. He says from then, it's been a cascade of additional cases. Those who passed, he says, weren't in the hospital long before they went terminal. During church services, they require masks. The auditorium is thoroughly cleaned in between services. They practice social distancing and offer hand sanitizer. Davis is pushing to get more people vaccinated.
The line will progress around here. The table's here where they'll have a chance to actually register.
They held a vaccine event in March where he says they vaccinated about 800 people. With the surge in the community and inside the church, they're holding another event.
All I know is my heart and passion is to help the people that I'm called to serve, and do whatever I can to help see to it that they are in a healthier place.
It's open to the public, and Davis encourages everyone to get informed and get the vaccine.
So that last piece was from WFLA, which is the local affiliate there in Florida. And I want to sort of just go through. This is actually from today's New York Times. And, this is serious business, what's going on. For the first time since February, the United States is averaging more than 100,000 new coronavirus cases a day, a resurgence that is hitting especially hard in states where large portions of the population remain unvaccinated. The pace of the new cases reports slowed in the spring as vaccination efforts picked up speed. A cautious optimism returned, and the summer was supposed to be joyous rebound to normalcy. But the 7-day average of the new COVID case reports has doubled in the last 2 weeks, and deaths have nearly doubled to an average of 516 a day. The surge is tied to a highly contagious Delta variant of the virus. Vaccine provides a high degree of protection against the variant, which was first detected in India, but only half of the U.S. population is fully vaccinated. Dr. Rochelle Walensky, the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has described the current stage as a pandemic of the unvaccinated. The rising cases has reignited debates around mandates for masks and vaccinations. In a reversal, Governor Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas, a Republican, said on Sunday that a state law banning mask mandates had been a mistake. It was an error to sign that law. I said that he said on Face the Nation. I admit that. So this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And there's also an important piece I want to show that I don't think that people get, because I know some people who are unvaccinated and who in some cases may think that they'll just get the virus, get sick, and they will be just fine. And there's a flaw in that thinking. And I want to play this piece from Fareed Zakaria on Anthony Fauci on Fareed Zakaria this weekend. And he goes into the flaw in that idea. And then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more about that.
Let me ask you what Scott Gottlieb has been saying, former FDA commissioner. He says, look, the truth is this Delta variant is going to pass. It's going to peak and go away or decline substantially because you have large numbers of people vaccinated. You have large numbers of people infected, and the combination of those two will provide a kind of herd immunity. And I suppose if you look at Britain, where the Delta variant has begun to decline, that would be the trajectory we could expect. Is he right?
No, ultimately that is correct. I mean, that's the concept of herd immunity. When you get enough people vaccinated together with people who've been infected and assume to have, understandably likely, have good protection against the same virus, you get to a certain level where the virus has no place to go. There are no vulnerable hosts around. Ultimately, that will happen. However, we want that to happen sooner than later. And you know the way you do that sooner than later? You get as many people vaccinated as quickly as you possibly can. The idea of waiting back, and it's going to happen anyway, that it's going to have this concept of herd immunity. We want to go and get that to happen much sooner than later. Fareed, there are 93 million people in this country who are eligible to be vaccinated who are not getting vaccinated. You want to get to herd immunity? Let's get those people vaccinated, and we will be there much quicker than just letting things happen. That's not an option, because when you do that, people get very sick, people get hospitalized, and people die. And the people who get COVID, I would much rather get vaccinated and not get COVID than get COVID and then be protected. Because with COVID, besides the risk of getting seriously ill, there's a thing called long COVID, which means you may get moderate to mild illness, recover virologically, and then go for months with the persistence of symptoms. This is something to be taken seriously, and that's the reason why we emphasize we are fortunate enough as a nation to have a highly effective vaccine, more than we even are using. So let's utilize that, because there are people in the world who would do anything to get vaccinated, and yet we have the tool to do it. So we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to them.
All right, guys. I think that's really important piece of information, and there's one other important part to this that I want to sort of detail that I don't think a lot of people are appreciating or know about. But there is this thing that Fauci talks about called long COVID. And long COVID is something that I just started hearing about fairly recently myself, but I remember people talking about this long COVID. I remember the actress Alyssa Milano talking about it, how she had gotten over the virus, but months later she was still having symptoms, still having issues with respect to the virus. But the New York Times came out with this piece over a young man who has long COVID. And it's pretty disturbing because it causes cognitive issues. And he says this kid is Will Grogan, stared blankly at his ninth grade biology classwork. It was material he had mastered the day before, but it looked utterly unfamiliar. I don't know what you're talking about, he blurted. His teacher and classmates reminded him how adeptly he'd answered questions about the topic during the previous class. I've never seen this before, he insisted, becoming so distressed that the teacher excused him to visit the school nurse. That episode earlier this year was one of numerous cognitive mix-ups that plagued Will, 15, after he contracted the coronavirus in October, along with issues like fatigue and severe leg pain. As young people across the country prepare to return to school, many are struggling to recover from lingering post-COVID neurological, physical, or psychiatric symptoms, often called long COVID. The symptoms and their duration vary, as does the severity. So those people who are like your Rand Paul and those folks like that who are talking about just get the virus, you get the virus, your body overcomes the virus, you get natural antibodies, and everything is well with the world. Instead of getting jabbed with a needle and getting the vaccine. Well, the problem with that is long COVID. And this long COVID thing, people still are unclear as to what the hell the true symptom, how long this is going to last, what the issues are going to be down the line, and so forth. So if you're not getting the vaccine, thinking you'll just get sick and you'll just write it out. I remember there was a reporting, a guy was sitting there in a hospital talking about how he just, wrote out the virus and he feels much better. Not only is it selfish because you are taking a bed from somebody who needed to get real medical help because they had a stroke, they were hit by a car, they have cancer, and now there's no beds like this child who had COVID and was ill and couldn't find a bed. So not only are you selfish because of that, but then again, you add this whole other aspect of it, of long COVID. You could end up with symptoms for years going forward that in some cases may never go away. I remember reporting early on where COVID damages your lungs, damages the heart, and does all this kind of stuff. So the whole idea of just allowing the body to fight this, getting infected and allowing the body to fight this, something that a lot of people surprisingly who think they know what they're doing has been advocating. I think that Anthony Fauci knows more. I think that these reports are really frightening as to what might happen and what could happen with long COVID. Okay. I want to talk about next this Donald Trump and this attempted coup. This is a story out of the New York Times. Katie Benner did a story, I think, and she sort of this was kind of a bombshell, and I'm not exactly certain why this is such the bombshell that people were making it out to be, because everybody knows that Donald Trump is totally corrupt, and I thought that everybody knew that he was doing everything within his power to hold on to power. But this reporting out of the New York Times was, I think, caught everyone by surprise. The lengths to what he did, and it actually brings up a lot of other things for me. One is you can't have corruption without collusion, right? You cannot have this stuff go on. You can't have a corrupt leader without his followers, right? And Donald Trump knows that, and he says it a lot of times. And the way he talks about it is, you've got to be tough. We need tough people. You've got to be tough. And that's the terms that he uses. You've got to, somebody who is looking for colluders is trying to shame them into joining what it is they're doing because they can't do it alone. So one of the things that you get from this new reporting is that Donald Trump was on the search for colluders and was on the search trying to find people who will help him pull off this coup. And he finds this person and finds a few people. And one of the things that's happening right now, I believe over the weekend, this new reporting says that he is he was able to find somebody who would help him collude. And one of the things that it goes into is, and one of the things that I think is, in my mind, culminating in this one piece of reporting and in this incident are three theories that have been on the Republican right for a long time. This is why I'm saying Donald Trump did not create this. The Republicans have been working on this for years. One is this idea of the unitary executive, right? So part of what's happening is that the Justice Department, after Watergate, after Nixon, realizes that one of the things that Nixon was doing with his Saturday Night Massacre and all, other things, asking his lieutenants to start putting out together an enemies list, starting to go after people. One of the things that came out of Watergate was this idea that we cannot, the Justice Department has to remain independent from the executive branch, from the President of the United States. There has to be a clear delineation between the Justice Department and the President because, quote unquote, no one is above the law, right? That comes out of Watergate. That comes, directly from Nixon. And if Nixon or if any president of the executive branch tries to get other branches that are under him to commit crimes, then that is a no-no, and we shouldn't do it. So out of the Watergate comes from the Justice Department, the CIA, FBI, and these other groups, not laws, but norms and memos and ways of doing things. And one of those things is this idea that of an independent Justice Department that works independent from the executive branch so that there is separation. The problem with that on the right is this unitary executive theory, which people like, I think, George Conway, who I think is people sort of champion on the left. I think he believes this because he's been against Donald Trump. But so-called great Supreme Court Justice escaped my mind right now. But Alito Thomas believes this kind of stuff. We know that Bill Barr believed in it. Dick Cheney believes in this unitary executive theory. And it comes out of this sort of ruling that is made by the Supreme Court at the time, basically saying that the executive branch has supremacy over all of the parts of government that fall under the executive branch. So any rules or any norms or any of those things are unconstitutional that say that he has limited power over them. He has power over it all. It is supreme. It is, and the idea of a unitary mean it is singular. It is the president has this power singularly only unto himself. So if the president asks, the Justice Department to jump, their only answer is how high. Right? Bill Barr believes this. This is why Bill Barr does the things that he does. And a lot of people on the right believe it. And you better know that, and this is where it ties into these judges that are from the Federalist Society, these Federalist Society judges that Mitch McConnell has been putting on the bench. You better know that they also believe it. And on the Supreme Court, as I just mentioned, Thomas, Alito, Kavanaugh, most likely. I actually would believe all of them pretty much believe. In addition, legislatures believe this as well. This whole idea that culminates with this legislative supremacy theory, which I'm going to play this clip from Chris Hayes, who has been on top of it this entire time, talking about this whole thing and what happened in the New York Times and what Katie Benner writes about, and that is that the people don't, and this is out of a court decision that basically says that the people don't elect the president, the electors elect the president. So the legislature is supreme even over the courts. The state legislature makes the decisions on who decides who the president is. So all these folks who are voting, I don't even know why you need to vote, because the legislature can at any point in time make the decision that they're going to override the vote of the people. And that's embedded in the Constitution. That's a part of constitutional theory that these judges, right, believe in. Because theoretically, the legislature is put in by the people. So they're the people's representative. Then you combine that with voter suppression, and then you begin to see why voter suppression is so necessary. You have to have voter suppression if you want to have full power, because that means that the legislature can choose its voters. And if you have this idea that the legislatures have full power, have total power over the people and over the vote, and you give the power to that legislature, the ability to choose their voters, then you no longer have a democracy. You now then have an autocracy or a plutocracy. You have a handful of people running the country, controlling everything, not beholden to the people, not beholden to anybody else. So, as I said before, Chris Hayes has been on it. And I'm going to play this piece of video. I've got the right one queued up. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about it on the other side, about Katie Benner. I think he goes into Katie Benner's story as well.
Rick Hasen's the author of the great piece we just mentioned titled "Trump is Planning a Much More Respectable Coup Next Time." He's professor of law and political science at UC Irvine, writer of the Election Law blog, and he joins me now. And Rick, I've depended on you for analysis in this area of law for years and years and years. And I have noticed that you have been as unnerved by the revelations about what Clark was up to as I have been. And explain why that is.
Well, I've just been, I was worried during the period between the time we held the election and January 20th, when Trump actually left office, because there were so many places in which someone could try to mess with our system. It's not just that we have an electoral college system, which doesn't treat all voters equally. We don't have a national popular vote. It's that the mechanics that we use for actually translating each state's votes into those electoral college votes gives lots of room for people to mess with the results. And what we saw, the revelations that have come out over the last few weeks involving Jeffrey Clark, is that Trump was prepared to push a wacky theory that was actually had a potential to make a difference and could have, at the very least, caused a stalemate in Congress where we wouldn't have had a president voted on January 6th or January 7th after the insurrection. It really came a lot closer than I think any of us realized until we saw these revelations.
And this wacky theory, this sort of state legislature supremacy notion, we should note that this is the theory. So there's the kind of conspiracy theorists of the Dominion voting machines were run by China or hacked by Hugo Chavez's ghost, right? And that is so sort of cringe-inducing that even many Republican standard bearers can't quite bring themselves to say it. The respectable version that you get from Josh Hawley and from Ted Cruz and even from Jim Jordan is essentially a version of this theory. They basically said, look, we voted to block Joe Biden's electors because we believe the state legislature is the only authority for election rules, and those states violated the legislature, and therefore they don't count.
Oh, absolutely. And, Trump himself, in an interview that he gave to Phil Rucker and Carol Leonnig, said the same thing. He said, put aside all the fraud, or massive fraud, he claimed. But he said, even if you put that aside, you had election administrators and you had courts and governors setting rules that were not approved by the legislature. And therefore, that was reason enough to throw it to the state legislature to come up with an alternative slate of electors. Even if, and I make this point in the Slate piece, even if courts wouldn't go along with that, if there had been a Republican House, the members of the House could have accepted it. And it's not clear that the courts would have overturned it. It gives enough of an air of respectability that it could have been a very thin reed upon which to say that Trump actually won, even though we know he lost.
Yeah, when Mitch McConnell gave his speech on January 6th, which was quite harsh about Donald Trump and about the election, he said it wasn't particularly close. I remember this, Alex Perrine made this observation, very, very sharp writer, who said, the thesis of McConnell's remarks was that there's a right way to install a president over the will of the people, which is to come up with legal arguments conservative judges are willing to sign on to. Trump failed that, and this is the sort of embarrassing stunt loser Democrats do. That basically, you screwed this up. You did all these crazy things that got laughed out of court, and then you summoned a mob to come, chant "Hang Mike Pence." There's a way to do this, and it's that there's a way to do this that haunts, I think, all of us and informs your piece.
Oh yeah, had the election turned on Pennsylvania, and had the election been close enough that it was within the 10,000 votes that came in the last 3 days after the election as ordered to be accepted by the state Supreme Court, I have little doubt that the Supreme Court would have thrown out those votes and potentially handed the election to Donald Trump, even if Biden otherwise would have won. That is, there was this respectable enough legal theory, this independent state legislature doctrine, which could have served as the basis for completely changing the election results.
So that is the big story, and why it's so important. These things are all interconnected, and I think it's important not to ever forget that there is a plan afoot, in my view, and I think in the view of a lot of people, to do what Donald Trump did, but in a much more "quote unquote" respectable manner. There is a way to solidify power using the Constitution and using judicial theory. And Mitch McConnell knows that, and he's been working on that for a very long time. And I think that part of what Hayes talks about here and what these theories are, these judicial theories that nobody knows anything about. I mean, you would have to be paying attention very closely to what's going on the right to even understand that there is a theory out there. What? That legislatures have more power than the people? In a democracy, the people make a decision. No, not according to people like Barr and people like Mitch McConnell. They do not have the power. here is Benner's story that I think is really important to take a look at, because she goes into detail about what's important here is that after her story aired, Congress wanted to talk to the folks involved in this whole scheme. And I don't think I don't think that you can look at this as anything other than an attempt to overthrow the will of the people. But she goes on that Mr. Rosen had a 2-hour meeting on Friday with the Justice Department's Office of Inspector General and provided closed-door testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee on Saturday. The investigations were opened after the New York Times article that detailed efforts by Jeffrey Clark, the acting head of the Justice Department's Civil Division, to push top leaders to falsely publicly assert that the continuing election fraud investigation casts doubt on the Electoral College results. By the way, this is also significant, right? Because what Donald Trump recognizes is that, and he knows it would be criminal probably to say that there was fraud, but to create the appearance of fraud or the appearance of impropriety is sometimes just as devastating, right? This is one of the things that probably Roy Cohn and the rest of them, and he understood as a figurehead in New York politics, that, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It's just that as long as you tell people that it's out there, that it's in the wind, you can create the appearance of truth, the appearance that this is something that is really going on. So this is why it was important that he, in this reporting, he said there doesn't have to actually be fraud. You don't even have to say that there is fraud. You can just say that there is an investigation into fraud, and then leave the rest of it to us. So this is the whole thing. And what's interesting, of course, is that Donald Trump never fired Rosen but the plot highlights a former president's desire to batter the Justice Department into advancing his personal agenda. Jeffrey Clark is obviously a guy who believes that the president has the ability and the right to do this. But they were consistent with, right? So here's the quote from him. Mr. Clark, who did not respond to requests for comments, said in January that all of his official communications with the White House were consistent with the law. Right? This is what's important. What does the law say? This is what I don't think Democrats, I don't think folks on the left really understand this, because if they did, they would know it's about interpretation of the law, not just, how you feel and what people think and what's fair and what's not fair. It is, what does the law say? And that he had engaged in a candid discussion of options, pros and cons with the president, right? So he didn't care about whether what he was doing was something that would be against policy, would be immoral, unethical, would undermine the democracy. All he cared about was giving the president what he wanted, to collude. He wanted collusion. He wanted to collude with the president. And the only reason why this didn't happen is that no one else was willing to do it. They were going to do a mass resignation and everyone was going to leave. And if that happened, the appearance, it's not that Trump probably couldn't have filled that position. And read or listen to I Alone Can Fix It, Rucker and Carol Lenig's book and if you want to know more about what was going on in those days, and more about the attempts, and more about the work, and how much Kelly, how much the Joint Chiefs of Staff had, I think Mark Milley was could see what was going on, was trying to stop this stuff, to nip it in the bud, because he knew it's about appearances and it's about getting this thing early and nipping it in the bud. And if you don't have colluders, and if you can't collude, there cannot be corruption. Collusion is the air at which corruption breathes. And you have to have colluders in order to do that. Speaking of colluders and perception, new news today is Andrew Cuomo, another person who may find themselves impeached, another politician who may be going the way of the dodo very soon. It appears to be, I don't understand how Cuomo can survive this stuff, because what's happening and what's coming down is really, really tough stuff. Because, you know, there's colluders, and then there are people who are your friends, your allies, the people who you rely on, the people who are folks that you need to run the government, who've been by your side and have, you know, sort of worked with you over the time. And there's been no closer ally to the governor than Melissa Del Rosa. And if you're anyone like myself who's in New York and who was paying attention every day at the news conferences done by the governor, which he got a lot of praise for, Melissa Del Rosa was always at his side, assistant to the governor, probably like a chief of staff, I imagine, very high up there. And so the reporting today is that out of the New York Times is that his top aide, Melissa Del Rosa, said late Sunday that she had resigned. Right, so she went to the governor and she tendered her resignation, a move that came as the governor fought for political survival after a report from the New York State Attorney General that concluded he has sexually harassed nearly a dozen women. Her resignation meant that Mr. Cuomo, a third-term Democrat, lost one of his most loyal aides and trusted strategists while facing an imminent threat of impeachment in the state legislature and calls to step down from a constellation of top officials in his party, including the president and Nancy Pelosi. She'd stood by the governor's side for years, even as the inner circle shrank in size, and many of the top staffers who had helped first elect him in 2010 left the administration. And part of, I think, what's going on here is that the governor is being sued also by one woman. And she was not named, but she has come out publicly to speak. And apparently she did an interview this morning on CBS this morning. I don't think I'm going to play the whole thing, but I'm going to play much of it to let you know how devastating this is. Because I was a Cuomo supporter. I mean, really, I thought that you know, the stuff is bad, but how bad could it really be? But this is pretty bad.
The first woman to file a criminal complaint against New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is telling us why she did it. In an exclusive interview with CBS this morning and Albany's Times-Union newspaper, Brittany Commisso says Cuomo groped and sexually harassed her. Commisso was identified as executive assistant number 1 in the state attorney general's report and is one of 11 women who accused the governor of sexual misconduct. Cuomo denies all their allegations. Commisso says the governor broke the law and, in her words, needs to be held accountable.
To me, this was a dream job, and it unfortunately turned into a nightmare.
32-year-old Brittany Commisso started working as an executive assistant in New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's office in 2017. Nearly 4 years later, she's the woman known as Executive Assistant Number 1 in the New York Attorney General's report into allegations of sexual harassment by the governor.
In the report, you're known as Executive Assistant Number 1.
I am executive assistant in the governor's office, but I am also a mother, I am a daughter, I am a friend, I'm a colleague. I am more than Executive Assistant Number 1.
She says Governor Cuomo groped her twice, the first time on New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2019, at the governor's mansion.
I had to go over to the mansion to help the governor with a State of the State speech. I wasn't there late. I did my final edit, and while I was upstairs in the office, the governor said, "Why don't we take a selfie?"
So his suggestion, you
Yes.
say? With your phone?
With my phone. I then felt, while taking the selfie, his hand go down my back onto my butt, and he started rubbing it. Not sliding it, not, quickly brushing over it, rubbing my butt.
And did you ask him, what are you doing?
Well, this was while I was taking the selfie. I became so nervous that my hands were clearly shaking, and a lot of the photos that I was snapping were completely blurry. I showed him them, and he said, "Oh, those aren't good." And he said, "Why don't we go sit on the couch, and we can take a better one."
So you sat on the couch?
I sat on the couch because I thought to myself, okay, I don't think on the couch that he would have a way to just do what he just did. So I felt safer, actually, on the couch. And in the photo, I have my arm wrapped around his shoulder, almost as if, we were taking a picture with a buddy. And that is the one that has been blurred out, that has been now released to the public.
The governor has denied that he put his hand on.
So that is the devastating reporting that's going on Cuomo. Again, I said I was a fan. I just don't think he can survive this thing. He should resign. I mean, the Cuomo name, just for the name itself, you can go and do a tour after this and talk about your accomplishments and do a whole. I mean, it's the same argument that was used by Trump's team, telling him, it's over, move on. Talk about your accomplishments. Spend these last days talking about that. Why are you trying to fight this thing? But, powerful people, what can you do? So, moving on. We're almost close to the end here, but I still want to talk about a couple of things. I think one of the most important being the Dixie Fire that is doing massive amounts of damage to the country, and really this kind of I think that there is kind of a to some extent got to be an acknowledgement that we're no longer in a time where we're not going to be able to say that fire has a season, or that we can guarantee that water will be around anymore. There's already water futures. I don't know if people realize that, but you can already enter the future market and sort of, go short on water. It's unbelievable. But, so basically there's this article today out of the Times that sort of goes into this idea that we're not gonna cool the Earth down anymore. No longer going to stop global warming from intensifying over the next 30 years. There's still a short window to prevent the most harrowing future. A major United Nations scientific report has concluded. Humans have already heated the planet roughly 1.1 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit since the 19th century, largely by burning coal, oil, and gas for energy. And we've seen the damage. We're seeing the drying of lakes on the West Coast. Fires, the Dixie Fire destroyed homes. The number of homes, it's pretty unbelievable. The number of homes that were destroyed by this fire. Whole communities taken, eliminated. It's just like the largest in California history. As of yesterday, it said it continued to burn. Race to contain the Dixie Fire. We can take a look at this. This is 43 minutes ago, so this is probably fairly new video. We can take a look at what the hell this is showing us. But it is, look at this. The devastation is extraordinary. I mean, it's just like, we talk about the fires, we talk about the burnings, you talk about all these kinds of stuff. What about the air quality? And by the way, every one of these fires is creating more carbon in the atmosphere. So it's exacerbating the problem. So every time you have these fires, every time you have particularly these blazes in California, in Seattle, in these places, that fire, that smoke goes up in the atmosphere. That means that not only are you unable to run, you're unable to breathe. It's probably like smoking a pack of cigarettes to go out there and to even breathe the air. But in addition, it's making the situation even worse for global climate change. So it's a total, I mean, it's one of these things that that is really tragic and seems to me to be irreversible. Let's talk about the Olympics. The Olympics ended yesterday, and this was a very interesting Olympics, I have to say. I think that it was an Olympics that really spoke to a lot of different things that were going on in the U.S. I've never heard of or seen an Olympics where you actually have the American side voting against Americans. You had people bowing out. You had folks unable to complete the games. You had some amazing stories of people who actually helped one another out in the games. So the games ended yesterday. I actually watched it, and here is the medal count. And America comes up number one. 39 gold, 113 total, beating out China by a hair. And what was interesting is only a day or two beforehand, it was China. It looked like it was impossible. China was ahead by like seven gold medals. And the U.S., I didn't think that there was any way they would catch up. But somehow they caught up and surpassed them by one. So 39 gold to China's 38 gold. 113 total medals awarded to the U.S. China got 88. Japan, the host country, came in third with 27 gold and 58 total medals altogether. And then, as you can see, it goes from there. Britain, ROC is a Russian. For whatever reason, the nation of Russia cannot compete. So it is a coalition of Russian athletes that was able to compete on their own. Then Australia, the Netherlands, number 7, France, number 8. The Olympics, the next Summer Olympics, is in Paris, France. I'm going to play the video of that Olympics in a moment. Germany, 9, and Italy came in 10th. Canada 11th, and this is ordered by total number of medals. So, actually, no, it can't be ordered by total number of medals because Netherlands ahead of it has to be. It's the total number of gold medals it has to be ranked by. So the Netherlands, France, and Germany technically, and Italy technically all tie for 7th, and Canada, Brazil, New Zealand, and Cuba kind of all tie for 8th. So a lot of stuff came out of this. The U.S. men's basketball is the first one that I thought was interesting because things were not looking good for them. They sort of turned it around kind of at the last minute, this was another case of the right trying to take it as an opportunity to talk about wokeism and to talk about this being the result of their hate America stance and all of this kind of nonsense that sort of permeates on the right. And they were actually laughing, maybe too strong a term, but they were actively rooting against the American men's basketball. And I seem to just remember a time where if you did that and you were an African American, like if you took a knee, for instance, you were a pariah. I mean, you were somebody who was to be shamed and who was terrible. But there have been more dominant, more talented, and more celebrated teams in the U.S. squad than the group that came together for the Tokyo Olympics. But no national team has overcome as much adversity to win. What more can you
tell us about the journey that this team has taken?
Close these up tabs in the background.
Yeah, what I really saw after this game was the guys who had done this before.
That will be the last
Draymond
memory of
Green,
this
was
group.
his second goal,
And it will be a good one for American basketball as the U.S. men's teams finish with a gold medal after an 87-82 win over France on Saturday. The record books will show that it was the fourth consecutive gold for Team USA, but it was hardly routine as the Americans celebrated the final buzzer, wrapped themselves in the flag and one another, and in one another in hugs. It was just because they'd won the biggest prize, but because they knew what led up to it. No one had more perspective on this than Kevin Durant, who added a glorious chapter to the Olympic career by scoring 29 points to finish the brilliant tournament. That was his third gold.
Frankly, they didn't look good in Vegas. They didn't look good against France. And for them to get it all together, overcome all those challenges against teams that had so much more experience playing with each other, which turned into a huge advantage in these Olympics, that was a real accomplishment, and they were all feeling that.
Audio playing here. Okay. Sorry, guys. So anyway, this was a struggle. This was a struggle for this team. This is one of those special journeys, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a struggle for the U.S. men's basketball team, but the U.S. women's, what we call soccer, what they call football, was even worse, unfortunately. They really had a tough time of it. They have been probably one of the most outspoken in terms of support for Black Lives Matter. Their I think team coach Rapone, I can't remember her first name. She has been one of the most ardent supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement. She's been taking a knee for a long time, and of course, people hate her for it. And she's also been one of those people who have been willing to be outspoken about her rejection of Donald Trump. Throughout the women's soccer tournament at the Tokyo Olympics, teams from around the world have knelt before kickoff to protest racism and discrimination. The women's team has followed suit, and most of the players dropped to one knee ahead of their bronze medal game against Australia's Matildas. But one of the members, Carly Lloyd, stood with her hands on her hips as the team's 10 other starters took a knee. And apparently this is something that she does, which, she does not believe in taking a knee, which I think that I totally support. I think it's her right to feel like she should not have to do what these other folks are doing. It's not her gig to take a knee. So, that's her thing. Here's the other players and referee and all even taking a knee in support of the killing of black people and of social justice. But this one particular player does not do it. Totally fine with me, in my view. Not everybody is for taking a knee. But of course, Donald Trump, and last time in the Summer Olympics, the women famously took home gold, but this time they struggled and they did not take home gold. They took home bronze. And of course, everybody's not so favorite president had to jump in on this whole thing and decided that he was going to speak on the about the team, calling them woke, and because they didn't win the gold medal, adding everything that is woke goes bad, and our soccer team certainly has. if the soccer team headed by the radical group of leftist maniacs wasn't woke, they would have won the gold medal instead of the bronze. So Donald Trump, is doing what Donald Trump does, which is sow division and decide to take on the side of the ridiculous, for former president to even engage in this kind of behavior. But anyway, I digress. Taekwondo and fencing. I mentioned on the last video that we won gold for the first time there, and there is a in addition to all of the good things that came out, there was something that was controversial that was actually pretty fascinating when it happened, and sort of reporters kind of lapped this up. But it was and I'm going to talk in a minute about Tucker Carlson going to Hungary, because there was this story of a Olympic athlete who was summoned home because she criticized their government, right? And this is, of course, the great European that Tucker Carlson wants to talk about, how their freedoms and how great things are going there. This is a woman who is, because she criticized her country, she was told to go home, and she feared that she might be imprisoned, or I don't know what she feared, but she tried to defect, basically. And her attempt to defect, her name was Christina, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce her last name. She's Belarusian. And it says that the Belarusian coaches tried to force her to return home once she was summoned home, because she was complaining about being forced to run in a competition that she had never run for. She put that on social media, and they didn't like it. And those two coaches were their accreditation was removed, and she was able to find asylum in Poland after a dramatic attempt to force her onto a plane to Belarus. Then folks came in, and this got, on social media, and people got out there and started championing her and all this kind of stuff. It was pretty remarkable when this was going on and when it happened, and how many people sort of came to her aid and tried to help her out. Average, everyday people. So it is one of those stories that will go into the history books. So, as I mentioned before, the France takes over and gets the Olympics in 2024. During this programming, they had a little Olympics handover, sort of, I guess you would call it a sizzle reel, I think is what it's technically called. And I'm going to play it right now in case if people didn't see it. And if you're on YouTube, you're not going to see it because they're going to block this whole thing out once I upload it. But if you're on stream.vtip.net, you'll be able to see this both now and when I upload the original video. But here is their sizzle reel for the next Olympics happening in Paris, 2024. So let's take a listen to this. So, final part of this. Wow, it's 12:30, longer than I had expected to go, but a lot of stuff to get into. I want to play this thing with Tucker Carlson because any opportunity to talk about race, racism, and discrimination, all that kind of stuff is important. Tucker Carlson went to Hungary and met with the Hungarian leader, Viktor Orban, who is, I don't know, I think by everyone's account, anyone who has been paying attention is a wannabe fascist. And fascism and Europe go together like, milk and cookies. And part of what's happening right now in Europe and not just in Hungary, but all over, is this rise of fascism. And the fascism, of course, comes out of white racism and white nationalism. And Tucker Carlson actually, in my view, does us a service because we use these words like white nationalism and white supremacy, and people don't know what the hell you're talking about. What is white supremacy? What is white nationalism? What's the difference? What is that all about? Why do you think that this is a white nationalist? How do I notice it? How do I see it? How do I recognize it? I've talked a lot about this on this podcast: discrimination, exploitation, etc. So Tucker Carlson does us a service because he makes it very clear as to what white nationalism is and what white racism is and what it looks like, what it is trying to achieve, what it believes in. And Viktor Orban has been someone who's been a very good person. If you wanted to know, all you have to do is ask him. So I'm going to play this clip from the Fox News, Tucker Carlson's. I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's toxic and, I don't have a whole lot of time. But it's important to note this, and I'm going to talk about it on the other side because you can't shy away from this stuff. You've got to talk about this stuff, and we've got to make it known that this exists within the Republican Party, within conservatism, right? This is conservative, by the way. Viktor Orban sees himself as a conservative. So there's that. See if we can play this. Hold on a second. Technical difficulties, please stand by. All right, I don't think you can hear it. I actually unclear as to why it cannot be heard. I'm going to take a look at something very quickly so that you guys don't have to back and watch that. If I can't get this up and running, what I'll do is I will have an episode for tomorrow where I just focus on that. Actually, I think I might just do that. We're going to do another episode of The World as I Like It to Be tomorrow where we talk about and deal exclusively with Tucker Carlson and Viktor Orban and this whole deal. Because I think it's really important, like I say, to talk about this, discuss it, so that anybody who has any misgivings or any questions about what is going on and why it's bad and what the big problem is, I want to take a look at this and I want to go over it. So tomorrow on The World as I Like It to Be, we're going to talk about Tucker Carlson, his trip to Hungary to meet Viktor Orban. We're going to talk about what he stands for, what he believes. It is now apparently what Fox News believes and what Tucker Carlson, who a lot of people called a white nationalist, I kind of agreed primarily because we know that one of his main speakers, his main writers, his head writer, and everything that, as he put it, everything that went into, as the writer put it, everything that went into Tucker Carlson's Chiron or his teleprompter was written by him, and this guy was a white nationalist. So we know that Tucker Carlson is as well. If you would tolerate and keep a person like that and read what that person said, because you must have, Tucker Carlson may be a lot of things, but he's not a moron. So I know he's not a guy who's sitting there and did not read this guy's resume, didn't read the guy's writings, didn't look at what the guy was handing him and go, oh, I would never say this. No, he knew what it was, and it was right down his alley, which he liked. So that is what is going to be on tomorrow's The World As I Like It To Be podcast. I hope you join me. And I'm going to tweet out that there's going to be a tomorrow episode of this. So until then, please come back.